Thanks for staying with us. Now, almost half of all small, medium and micro enterprises were forced to close due to the coronavirus lockdown. And this is according to a study that was conducted by a financial services company, Finfind, and the Department of Small Business Development. And in the past 5 months of the lockdown, the majority of the surveyed businesses experienced a significant decrease in revenue, and they also had debt and no access to relief funds. So to talk to us a little bit more about this, we're joined by Darlene Menzies, who is the CEO of Finfind. Darlene, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thanks, lovely to be with you. Thank you.
Let's start by taking a look at the scope of the survey that you conducted. What kind of businesses were surveyed?
So prior to starting the survey, we actually had a look at all the other surveys that had already been done, most of them during lockdown level 5. So the outcomes were really a prediction of what might happen going forward in the months, but didn't actually speak to what actually happened. So we did a survey over 5 month ends, a cross-section of all sectors of businesses in the country, across all provinces and all sizes, from micro, very small, small and medium businesses. So we had a sample of really the microcosm of what the small business sector looks like in the country, landed up with a clean sample around 1,500 businesses, and then were able to take findings from those. It was quite a comprehensive survey, about 250,000 data points that were looked at.
So the survey shows that 42.7% of these businesses had to close, Darlene. That's quite a high number if you look at the fact that a lot of the jobs that are created by these SMMEs. So what were the main factors that led to the closure of these businesses?
Yeah, it really was a staggering figure. Even those of us that work in the small business sector were really quite staggered by the number of closures. And when you see the job losses that went along with that, you know, we heard the figure recently of 2 million job losses. And when you think of our sample, there was about 3 jobs per business that were lost. That's not only in the businesses that closed, but those that remained open. You can see how the small business sector really is the one hardest hit as far as job losses, not only full-time jobs, but part-time jobs, casual laborers, and even taking on consultants. SMEs reduced their intake of consultants or their use of consultants by 41% over the first 5 months of the pandemic. 60% of job losses full-time, 76% part-time job losses, and they were taking on 53% less casual workers. So you think of the massive impact of that on just unemployment over those first 5 months. And that, of course, has a ripple effect across everything, because those employees are the consumers of all the other big businesses and you know, the major retail stores, etc. as well. So very, very devastating. You asked the causes of that. You know, a lot of it had to do with most businesses never had more than 3 months worth of cash reserves available when the pandemic started, say when lockdown started. Most of them only could pay the next month's overheads. So not enough cash reserves, a difficulty in raising relief funding, no matter how much sort of noise was made about how much funding was out there. And then, of course, prior debt. People that had debt prior to lockdown were unable to service that debt. So, yeah, really just a real storm, a perfect storm of difficulty coming out of quite a hard year last year.
And speaking of relief funding, how accessible was the relief funding that government had put out, and to what extent was this useful to those businesses who were able to access it, Darlene?
Look, I'd love to be able to tell a more positive story, but if you have a look, 43% of the businesses that closed actually applied for that relief funding, and 99.9% of the applications were rejected. So only 0.01% of those businesses that closed actually managed to get funding. And of the businesses that remained open and needed urgently that cash, that funding to be able to make it through the next couple of months, 81% of their applications were rejected. So although the government put 200 billion together as a kind of guarantee with the banks to be able to support small business, there was a very small uptake of that by the banks, less than 5%. And so not a lot of small businesses were helped, unfortunately. And this goes back to an age-old problem of how banks and lenders assess small business when actually giving funds. So most of them, if they didn't have a tax certificate, they weren't able to get funding. Well, after the first couple of months of lockdown, there were very, very few of them that could pay their staff, let alone their PAYE or VAT. So these are very practical reasons why none of them were able to access the funding that was made available. And we just need to look at small businesses in a different way going forward if we're going to be able to get that money to them, to get them over a big shock like the pandemic.
And part of the story that isn't being told, or at least I haven't seen it being discussed, I can't even say widely, I haven't really seen any sort of focus on this, and I may just have missed it, Darlene, is exactly what this means for the ability of those businesses that folded to actually revive themselves at some point, or for the owners to start new businesses. We don't talk about how people's credit records, how the businesses' credit records are impacted, and the fact that going forward they may not be able to obtain or access funding because of that.
You raise a fantastic point there. You know, most small business owners would have paid themselves last, so they would have tried to keep the business going, paying their suppliers, paying their staff. The report actually shows the number of small business owners that weren't able to pay themselves over those months. So, of course, they're not then able to meet their own personal commitments as far as, their own expenses are concerned. And that, as you say, has a direct impact on their credit score. The problem with the way that lenders look at business credit is that instead of looking at the business's ability to repay or the business's repayment history of loans and credit they've taken, they look at how the owner has managed their own personal credit. So now when their credit score now has taken a knock over this period, when they do start up again, they're not going to be able to raise startup funds. Many of them has probably depleted their personal savings or pensions. So, it's not an easy picture at all. So that said, entrepreneurs are tenacious, they're gritty, and if there's anybody that is going to be able to pull themselves out of holes and pivot and start new opportunities, the thing when you have a big challenge like this is that challenges produce opportunities. So there's a lot of new opportunities that have come to light. People have been able to pivot. And I think the biggest shock for me in the stats was how few people had ever conducted business online. And I think that's a big focus area now going forward for those businesses, for government, for enterprise development programs. 58% had never had an online meeting prior to COVID. Only 53% had a website. So those are some of the opportunities now that can be taken advantage of, where people can start doing more business from home and being able to lower their overheads and be able to start again. But it's not going to be easy.
Darlene, you speak about the grit and tenacity of entrepreneurs. What was behind the sustainability of those businesses that didn't close down?
Interestingly enough, the majority of them had one business owner. So that was an interesting stat. Anybody who wants to go and look at the detailed report, it's available on our website. You can get right down into the nitty-gritty of male and female-owned businesses, how many had X many owners. But one of the telling signs were those that survived had been in business for more than 3 years, which is kind of the magic number. A business that can survive 3 years typically goes on to be a 10-year business, and that was very clear in the outcomes. Most of the businesses that survived through the pandemic in those first 5 months were older than 4 years, and so that I would say was the most telling sign. And then incidentally, many of them had only one business owner.
Darlene, you spoke about how businesses need to adapt, and some of the opportunities that this pandemic has actually thrown up. But in terms of how government has been doing things, what has government learned? What should government do differently going forward?
I think government has an amazing advantage over big business and anybody else in the country, that they have a reach to small business. So if you look at the CEDA branches, they have sort of one in every town across the country. I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration with the private sector who understand how to run business. I mean, government's essentially public sector entities, civil servants, not typically people that have run businesses. So I think to use their advantage of their access and distribution to the public across the country, but then using new tools and new opportunities business advisory services that come directly from the private sector that can make sure that the right skills, small business should know how to do business online. They should have a website. They should be able to do paid digital marketing. They should know how to do an online meeting. All of these things are basic skills in the private sector. And I think the government needs to harness the opportunity through their own outreach on the ground to be able to get those skills to people that have lost jobs and businesses that have closed, and even those that are currently open that need more support. But access to funding, number one, is the main thing that really properly needs to be addressed.
But looking at the constraints on the economy and government spending, that access to funding, you spoke about the banks and how they didn't quite come to the party during this lockdown. Azad Jameen also, we spoke about some of these impacts earlier on. So where's the funding going to come from? How much is realistically going to be available for those entrepreneurs who want to start up again to actually access?
Look, I really believe that government needs to relook at the way, they're called they're development finance institutions, which means they should have a development mandate. The money should be made available in a way that it's easy to access at really low interest rates, and the barrier should be lowered in terms of the ability to access that funding. And that isn't really the way development finance institutions are run in this country. They kind of run in the same way that the private sector lenders are run. And, you can understand banks. The caution there is they're actually lending small business, money that people have actually saved or have invested in investment opportunities and in the bank. And while I do think banks could do more, I think that even the guarantee scheme that was made available, it shouldn't have been so expensive. More banks should have been able to take it up because they are the ones that sort of have a better reach as far as the bank accounts. They can see what overdrafts have been taken in revolving credit facilities, so they can see the picture better. But all of them are not assessing small business correctly. They're looking at the owner's credit record, as we spoke about previously, and they don't have access to the real data within the business. Are those businesses paying their suppliers? Are they paying, just monthly rentals, their Wi-Fi, their phone accounts? There's no record to tell of their repayment history, so it's very difficult for them to extend credit. So I know the World Bank is currently doing a pilot with the National Credit Regulator around re-looking at how you actually assess small business. But the money's got to come in more of a development way from government, and it needs to come quickly.
And, Darlene, looking at all of these factors that you've mentioned, and then we see grim reports of how the education system, for example, is incapable of delivering just the sort of learning outcomes at a basic education level, let alone what happens at tertiary institution, and matching that to what the industry requires. How do we fix those things timelessly, given this desperate situation of around 2 million people who have been rendered jobless just as a result of this pandemic? We're not even talking about the high statistics before the advent of COVID-19.
Look, I think that entrepreneurship is the way forward. I mean, the big businesses are shrinking. Government's not going to be taking on, more jobs going forward. I mean, that we already have, overemployment in the civil servant environment. But we've got to get a spirit of entrepreneurship in this country where parents don't tell children that it's kind of it's the last option. If you can't get a good job, go and start your own business. If you look at some of the other countries in Africa and the emerging markets, it's a thing that people aspire to, is to be an entrepreneur. Everyone should have a side hustle. Everyone should have something that they can fall back on in difficult times. And of course, we have to have much more innovation. Innovation is simply fixing a problem with a big market. And if you look at how many problems countries like ourselves have during these pandemics, there are a number of different opportunities for people in their own specific area of influence that they can see, this is the stone in my shoe. If I could take it out of my shoe, I could take it out of many others. How do I fix that? And the mindset from young children should be, how to make their own income, how to be able to contribute. And I think that's what needs to go into the education system. Because ultimately, if children don't come out of school already knowing how to make money, how to manage money, and how to basically look after themselves outside of a full-time job, which I think going forward, the world of work is going to change immensely. I think that's really where we all need to focus. Get away from this mindset that, if you can't get a full-time job, then maybe try and start your own business. it should be, the pinnacle should be to have your own business, because in actual fact, entrepreneurs are the champions of this country. They're the heroes. They're the gritty ones that are actually going to make sure that we do get the jobs that are needed to turn the economy around. And we should be celebrating them.
So, Darlene, just as we wrap this conversation, what advice do you have for those who had small businesses? Is this the right time to try and restart? Are there funds that they can apply for right now for access to stock and so on? What should people do?
Personally, prior to about 8 years ago, I actually liquidated 3 times. Liquidation and failure in business is actually almost, it's part of the road to success. And there's a lot of lessons that you learn from businesses closing. I think the first thing for people to understand is the easiest money is going to come from their immediate networks. Their family and friends, people that know who they are, know how disciplined and committed they are, know what they can do. Rather raise a small amount of money, keep your overheads down, start from home, get online and start getting something going, because the money is not that easily available out there, either from public or private sector. Lenders are quite reticent at the moment, knowing that, it's difficult for a business to forecast how they're going to do in the months to come in terms of repayments. And so go to your immediate networks and, start small and pivot. Have a look. When I say pivot, it's this kind of word that's thrown around a lot, but it's meaning, where are the income streams that are naturally going to come? What are the pull market opportunities? What are people around you needing? And are you able to easily deliver that service? And even if you don't have the ability to do that, if you're a good business owner who knows how to manage a business, find someone who can render that service and work with them. More partnerships, more collaboration. We have to work together. But mainly, I want to say to South Africans out there, support locals. We hear it all the time, and it's kind of, it's just nice to have. But, in your Christmas shopping and things that you're doing, think about home industries and shops that you can support, because you're feeding, those people's families and their staff's families. And ultimately, they are the consumers of everyone else's business, because if we lose those jobs, they can't buy from other businesses either. So support local. And but I would just say to entrepreneurs out there, the sun's going to come up every day. You're going to look back and wonder how you got through it, but you will get through it. And you just need to be able to focus on being positive. It's not easy.
Well, sage advice there. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Darlene Menzies, CEO of Finfind, talking to us about their recent report on small businesses and stark reading, which indicated that 42.7% of SMMEs were actually forced to close due to the coronavirus lockdown. But thanks to Darlene for sharing some advice as well. And this speaks to our question of the day in part as well, asking you about what you think should be done. What can government do to try and create more jobs in the country? We have an official unemployment rate of over 30%. Unexpanded, we're told, could be over 50%. So what needs to happen? Let's take a look at some of your responses. Dani says the agriculture sector has potential to create jobs, but the government red tape is the one delaying progress in this sector. For example, applying for water rights and environmental impact assessment takes 12 months. A rural development lease signing, that's worse. Ruan says, discard imports from China. South Africa can produce its own goods. We don't need China's support. We need redress of policies to expand South Africa's share of global goods and services markets. Most importantly, we must promote innovation and also have younger cabinet ministers. Such an important point about innovation there. Mrs. Juice says, based on where I live, there are so many jobs, but there's a lot of immigrants working in those jobs. Let's start small. Those jobs that don't need any special skills or qualifications, give priority to South Africans. Maybe there'll be a shift somehow. AKK says create BEE that evaluates the entire supply chain of a tender to ensure that local employment and transformed ownership across the entire supply chain management value chain for products and services. At Vilagazi Rose, stop hiring foreigners in positions that don't require scarce skills. We can't have foreigners working as teachers, nurses, cleaners, accountants, waiters, security guards, and so forth. Those are not scarce skills. South Africans should come first in South Africa. And Zama says, when the performance of our economy is this bad and shedding of jobs, the government should save its people from starvation by ring-fencing the microeconomic space for exclusive use by South Africans. Entry-level jobs must also be reserved for South Africans. And Fortune, you have the final word this morning. Building state capacity. This will employ more people, and most of all, we won't have leaked exam papers. And that, of course, is a matter that continues, the matter of the matric rewrite. And thank you so much for all the students who've written to me in that regard as well. I truly empathize with you. And you heard the Department of Basic Education stance. Those who oppose the rewrite of those papers will meet them in court. And so many questions to be asked. You know, for me, the pivotal question here is that why did it take so long? I just believe the department should have informed listeners and rather learners earlier. And this is where we are going to leave it for this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll do it again tomorrow. Take care until then.